Oh, hello. In the attempt to see and then to experience the never-ending continuum of this living body of life, the necessity, of course, for a long period of time is for people to have something small enough, mapped out, measured enough that seems to make some immediate sense. Somewhere that you can apparently put the foot of your little mind. So one area that I have mentioned periodically in the past, I want to recover. Reminding you of me drawing out the circuitry of humanity into the red, yellow, and blue circuits, representing what would normally be thought of as being the general life and health of the body, and that of the mind, and that of what people like to laughingly call the emotions. And reminding you that the circuits do not exist in isolation, and they should not even actually be referred to as the red circuit. It would be the red circuits, and the blue circuits, and the yellow circuits. And the way in which I normally draw them out of the red circuit being the oldest and the most basic, and the blue circuit, and then the yellow circuit. But tonight, I want to do it in a binary fashion for a specific reason, to map out a certain little area wherein life is continually talking. It continually talks through sociology, politics, everyday experience, but in a specific way. If we consider that this was our ordinary human. Now let me draw an arbitrary line. The reality of it exists, but of course I assume that you do not normally meet people with a line like this drawn through them. But imagine this is cutting right in the middle of the blue circuit. In truth, as you might be able to pick out as I go along, it would be a little closer to draw it where the blue and the red circuit were below the line and the yellow circuit was above the line. But to give you people who feel as though you are very emotional, so that you won't feel any more discomforted than you normally are, let's say that it just split right through the middle of all three circuits. Using my mapping of time zones, I could also, by the by, I could point out that down here would be like a time zone to your left. It's like an hour behind if I had drawn the figure around laying on its side. And here at the line, or above this arbitrary line, would be like current time, standard time, present time. And this would be what would amount to the zone, a zone to the west. That if we said present time was right now standard Eastern Standard Time, then Central Standard Time would be below the line. The parallel that I am attempting to sketch out for you in specifics has to do with the time-honored descriptions that life has talked about through humanity, and it primarily comes out in the political arena, but it covers much more. But let me start off from the political aspect. That they divide up, that is, the nervous system, the brain of man, translates life speaking through it for eons now, dividing up the body politic into the conservatives and the liberals, the conservatives and the progressives, the right wing and the left wing. Now, I will assume that everyone is horizontally sophisticated enough that you think you have some notion of what that means. And if you have a notion anywhere close to what I'm talking about, then your notion is not unfounded. Just the way that life speaks through humanity generally. You might find it also interesting that they use such terms when they're describing the conservative area of politics, the conservative people of the world, even if it's not used in an instant political sense. That right-wing people, conservative people, according to the liberal viewpoint, the one that would be present time, we'll say, they are regressive. They are always attempting to defend the past. They're attempting to uphold the past. And in many cases, apparently, they are attempting to take the present situation and run it back into the past. That everything was fine up until now. I've had no complaint. We've been operating in such and such manner for these hundreds of years or these decades. Why change it for the sake of changing it? Nothing is wrong with it. Below the line, those operating in a Western time zone, their feeling toward those that I have designated above the line, the present time would be wherever you are on this planet. At that time and place, whatever would be considered liberal, progressive, socially active people, be it in a political, or economic, or social sense, then those below the line, they find those above the line to be starry-eyed dreamers. They find them to be malcontents who seem to be in favor of change simply for the sake of change. That they have crackpot ideas about how this one thing should be fixed, when from their viewpoint it has not been broken. That everything is fine. That's coming out with these strange ideas is what stirs up problems. That they can pick out a social situation, an economic injustice as they see it at present time, and they come out with a theory of here's what should be done. The conservatives, those below the line, the center of their gravity, the center of their consciousness, the way in which life is using them, it says, since you have come out with this theory up there, things have gotten worse. If you hadn't mentioned it, it'd have been all right. We'd all learned how to live with it. I dearly hope anyone seeing and hearing this has the wherewithal to hold on to your little selves and not take sides as of yet, because there is no side to take. Life needs both of these situations. There is not one group that is at fault, and there is not one group that is right. The general group that I said was represented by the standard time, those above this line I have drawn, you would find by and large that somewhere within their rhetoric, somewhere within that which life speaks through them, would lie more indications of what is about to take place in that general area than there is below the line. Because below the line is always based upon a continual reannouncement, an attempt to reestablish the validity of that which has gone before. Now, if you could see it in a certain way, I could also liken it unto a clock. That up here would be the mechanism actually keeping time, showing that time is moving. But if it was one of the older clocks that were constructed on the pendulum basis, then you have got to have the weight at the bottom of the clock to make the top part work. If you cut off the pendulum at the bottom, it no longer keeps time. It doesn't go anywhere. You could, among other things, look at those in this category as being a kind of counterbalance. Absolutely necessary. But it is not on the basis that one group is right, that anything that life speaks through present time people, through liberals, through the left wing, through the humanistic parties and philosophies. It is not that everything that is said is going to come to pass. Nor is everything that is said down here absolute stupidity. But you can use this as it's going on, and don't, I keep using the political terms, but let me remind you, as I said, it really has nothing to do with politics. It just so happens that that is where the most specific terminology has mechanically come about. You can find it in sociological descriptions of the classes throughout the world. You can find the same thing if you can see it. You have got to have both of these. But if you begin to look around at everything from literature to music to your grandfather's opinions of what's wrong with the world today, to your parents' opinion about your generation, some of you who are getting long enough in the tooth to now find voices in you making comments here in 1986 of people with spiked hair, painted purple, and listening to the Sex Pistols revisited, you find that you already have voices, and those voices now coming out, those voices are now beginning to speak in a way that is audible to you. You find that in your own lifetime you have passed into another time zone. A piece of you, let us say that maybe in the 60s you were out marching in the streets and you were just as liberal as could be, just in an ordinary sense. Now let us say that you have picked up a mortgage. This of course is not what causes it. But let us say that just in the ordinary scheme of things running, you are now in your 40s and you have a mortgage and a station wagon and 2.5 children. And now you are suddenly having feelings, you are suddenly hearing voices in you, and if you don't watch it, you suddenly hear voices not only in you, but coming out of your little mouth at some school meeting or talking to your neighbors about the present generation and how you fear for your children. They're going to grow up around such and such things going on in our schools, in the country, in the world. You could look at it as though this has happened to you in your lifetime, because it has. It's as though your clock up here hit 40 o'clock. And suddenly from here down, or from here down, way back in here, you are suddenly from Alabama. Your lower regions, your pelvis has moved outside of Fort Lee, New Jersey, or to Bakersfield, or to Barstow. You are living in Alabama. You now have a conservative party in you. And you thought at one time you and, let's say, you and all of your acquaintances were liberal, politically, socially, economically. But now you find that, using the political allegory, that you suddenly have divided up, or it has divided on you, your own body politic, and there's an aisle down the middle. And you have suddenly developed a right side of the House, the right side of Parliament. And now those same voices in your own lifetime are talking below the line and with ordinary people. Please notice just the way things are. With ordinary people, no matter what they were in their childhood, the general scheme of things is this voice is going to take over. It's going to take over to the point that if it's brought up, it will condemn what this part had done in the past. Yeah, I used to go around carrying Marxist signs and attacking ROTC buildings in college, but boy, was I naive, boy, was I an idiot, because now I see the communist plot to run drugs into our schools and ruin my children. And they want to redistribute the wealth. They want to redistribute the wealth now that I got some. Back when I was 20, I said redistribute the wealth. I was living on food stamps. I didn't care. I bring all this up not just to get a laugh. That is the scheme of things. That is the way time zones continue to run in this universe, in the body of life. Except it is not three-dimensionally spherical, like we take a globe in the time zone, you start at Greenwich and you keep going around and you come back there. This keeps adding on time zones every generation. And every generation, normally this line gets drawn through here, along about the age of 40, just to give it a rough figure. And suddenly, even apparently you had never had a conservative wing in your body politic, You suddenly not only have one, but they're able to elect the prime minister. But note, look around you, your parents, look around you at your peers, if you're not ordinary enough that it has really captured you. Look around at the wild-eyed liberals with whom you grew up, and you're not going to find many of them now out marching for peace. They're going to be out picketing plants for higher pay. Or they're out somewhere filing lawsuits against whichever brokerage firm is about to turn belly up again. That is the way life operates. With ordinary people, it is necessary that there be a great number in their younger horizontal days that live in the present time zone, that the clock up here is running at their present time, and they're out in the streets marching against everything, throwing rocks, screaming about revolt. But it is just as necessary that by the time they hit, say 40 again, the age is getting younger, but say they hit 40, that they suddenly go into another time zone. They develop this conservative part of their body politic, their body. But in the individual, it is the same sort of thing that is happening on a planet-wide scale, because you generally would find no profit, or life finds no profit, in a large group, much less a majority, but even a large group, of 60-year-old radicals. In fact, if any of you has ever seen one, there are some around, because there's always exceptions. In fact, once you begin to see that, exceptions aren't exceptions. Exceptions are just like the rule supposedly is. But if you've ever seen one, and now he's 60 or she is 60, they're no longer frightening. They may still be dressing like they were dressing 40 years ago, mouthing the same kind of philosophy that was liberal, that was present time 40 years ago. And here they are, with wrinkled skins and double hernia, no hair, and they're still dressed like a radical 40 years ago. They don't frighten anybody. Nobody takes it seriously. You simply feel, hey, you're a neat old codger, but boy, you missed out somewhere. You expect. It's not just psychological. It's not because of what you have picked up. Your genes expect when you find somebody over 40. You expect them to be reactionary to whatever's going on now. If they're not, it strikes you. It's strange. Ordinary people, it strikes them more than strange. It's almost deranged. For someone 40 or 50 to meet another person that's obviously their age at the golf course or the cocktail party, and for the other person, if the conversation falls into economics, let's say, another person is spouting some kind of radical, for that time and place, some sort of radical economic theories, it's more than a little strange. Your genes do not expect it. If you reach that age, you're supposed to be, your prime minister, your center of gravity is supposed to be back in what was at one time a present time zone, but now since another generation has added a new one to the east that keeps going nonstop, then your center of gravity should be at least one time zone behind. You live long enough, many people get 2 time zones behind. It's of no great importance, but normally what you have at any given time and place is the population divided up. Any country, any group of people, any tribe is divided like this. If you hit somebody 70 or 80 years old in that group, I could draw another time zone. It would be, for instance, if somebody, say, in our country was still alive and they were still fighting the Civil War here, or even World War I now, still complaining about that, about how the West blew it, right after World War I when they didn't do such and such for the Germanic states and etc. It's just irrelevant. Nobody gets upset. Nobody really reacts to it because it's too small a phenomenon. But what you generally have is life divided up in any particular area into 2 great time zones, the liberal and the conservative. And you find, once you reach a certain age and you have moved your center of gravity, or it has moved on you, like fat going to your ass, that the center of gravity has moved into the conservative camp on the right-hand side of the aisle, what you're defending is your generation. As I said, based upon our time span and the way life has worked out, what you generally have at any given time, although now we have more than one generation, two generations alive, it's still as though you could draw a line right down the middle. And it's this whole group, those at least over 40, defending, speaking out in a time zone that is now 1 hour behind, that things were fine. Things were great when Eisenhower was president, when you could still buy an all-state automobile at Sears on the credit. And the worst thing we had to worry about children was whether somebody went out and sneaked a smoke and let their hair grow long enough to comb ducktails. We thought that was terrible. But now look, people in grammar school are smoking those funny cigarettes. Things, without any doubt to that voice within everyone, that voice in life, without any doubt, things have gotten much worse. It's not even comparable. The trouble we got in, we might go over and push over somebody's outhouse. Now kids bomb buildings. It's terrible. Without that reactionary force, though, nothing could move. Same way in the laws of so-called physics. That the laws in politics, the laws in all the areas that life has mapped out and separated of psychology and religion and sociology. Were it not for one group always defending the past, which was their present, remember, at one time. That's where they were living presently. But by the age of 40, they have shifted. A new generation has come along and established a new time zone. And so where you were, if you're ordinary, where you were in the present, to you still seems to be the present. And you don't notice that in the universe, they have added a new time zone as far as you were concerned. And it was true. As far as you were concerned, you were living right there at Greenwich time. In other words, the first hour of every day, that's where you were. Educated, sophisticated, right thinking, up to date, hip. Or if you're 40 years old, help. And you didn't notice. You were in the time zone, the avant-garde time zone, and you didn't notice. You took a little snooze, and at 40 you looked around, and they have, son of a bitch, they have put in a new time zone. I mean, it's impossible, and of course that's not the way people see it. They see it as the sky's falling. But a new time zone has been slipped in, and you've been pushed back. Now, if you were looking at a map of you and life, you were at the right-hand side of the map, drawing time zones in vertical fashion. That's where you were. At the age of 40, suddenly, you got pushed over. And now there's another time zone. You are now 1 hour behind. You are now a member of the Conservative Party. You are now a yokel, a redneck, a regressive, a dunderhead, a peckerwood, a know-nothing, a Philistine, a dunderhead, an old fogey, a stick in the mud. I know the others I'm not thinking of, but I guess you get the gist of it if you are one especially. But I remind you again, those that immediately see the validity of this, it's not all that occult. This is not some sort of psychological problem. This is not something that's the fault of this generation, the last generation. It is not some problem for which there is a cure of saying what we need, for instance, is more education. If we had more education, we would not have so many regressive-minded people in the world. And it's not true. For the time being, that is necessary. It's got nothing to do with education. It's got nothing to do with economic class. You can find this situation replayed from the most intimate, personal relationships between two people to you can two large groups of people, two nations, two economic classes, two social classes, two competing religions, is you can always find this. Of course, you've got to have the right instrument to look, because if you're looking through your own body politic, you can make a mistake as to which is above the line and which is below. But you can find everything tinged with this. That whether it be art, social relations, economics, and so on, there is always a large group of people clamoring for change, whether they have any, quote, reasonable program to offer, or else whether they're out trying to storm the barricades and burn down the city. A fervor with which they cry out for change, all the way from social shifting of patterns to outright revolution. And you always find, whether it be social interaction, literature, dance, painting, even science, you find another group just as seriously involved. They lack the certain sweaty passion because of their age, but who are just as sincerely used by life to defend the status quo, all the way from their status quo, which was 20 years ago, to back even another 20 years. That everything was fine then, which to them is now. Everything now is worse. And everything in people who are living now, which they don't see it that way, but everybody in the present time zone, if things are worse now, but if we did what they said, it would be worse times 2. That keeps things. I'm giving you a description that I could absolutely tell you this is a law, but when I put it into words, it's ridiculous. I mean, it's true, but it's ridiculous. That things would absolutely fall apart, fly apart, were it not for this situation right there. Were it not for the situation in ordinary people of having another time zone catch up with you, and you begin to defend the right-hand side of the aisle, that you become conservative. It is necessary in life for things to grow at a certain tempo and to grow in a kind of a range control fashion that cannot be adequately described, and I certainly can't prove it. But for those who can begin to see the information, the telltale signs, even the keys to these maps I draw out are everywhere, not in hidden books. Everybody's talking about it. Your neighbors, politicians, would-be candidates for office, social commentators, even, God forbid, critics. And it appears to be a running, deeply entrenched battle. The names of the players change as they die out, but the battle stays the same. The progressive wing of some church as opposed to the orthodox, which the orthodox was somebody's past, present time. There seems to be absolutely no middle ground between these people. And why is that? For those of you that have seen enough of these tapes, I guess you understand or expect my hint to you is going to be is you cannot find the other prince. You cannot find the other area of the body politic, because there are 3. But when you can only see 2, there is no end to this. And there is no satisfying the conflict. There is no taking one of these camps and proving to them that the other one has any validity whatsoever. You're not supposed to. It's not possible, but they cannot even hear it in theory. That whatever time zone you are living in, where your center of consciousness is, everything else is non-time. It is time that is anachronistic. It is time that is out of kilter. The people are out of step. They may be even goose-stepping, but they're out of step. They're going to trip. or they're kicking their feet up so high they're going to kick us all in the shins or worse places. Something's got to be done. And what's got to be done is things keep moving. Everyone, if you're ordinary, takes everything, of course, in life as an individual experience, as an individual awareness. And nobody can see that whatever happens is simply some part of the general molecular scheme, and that individual consciousness, to be charitable, is misnamed. Individual experience, to be even as charitable, is misnamed. You cannot have an individual experience. There is nothing to experience individually. No one can really perceive that. I guess some of you that giggle right then thought you heard something, but you can't walk around under ordinary conditions and hold that awareness. Because people speak of individual experience. It is that which seems to be the basis of everything that people plan to do, everything that they do. And they refer to it as my personal experience. What I am is a result of my personal experiences. What I know, what I feel, my philosophy in life is based upon my personal, my individual perceptions. And there's no such thing as an individual perception. What are you going to perceive? There's no such thing as an individual experience. I mean, go have one if you want to consider that a task for next week. Take some time out, the weekend's coming up, and set aside several hours, and I want you to go ahead and have, don't just say it, but actually have an individual experience. No matter what comes to mind, even if you can, there's no such thing. I was going to second guess some of you to think of some solitary erotic experience. It's not. There's nothing that qualifies as an individual experience. The general molecular shift is that which makes a man feel that he has experienced something, but it dictates what he experiences. The general molecular scheme at your time and place, tied in with your own genetic background, dictates what it is that you apparently can perceive. And this includes all movements, again, from the apparent individual level to mass areas in the scheme of wars, moral shifts, fads, political upheavals, social changes. That as always, there are people, those who are molecularly pulled into it. Being human, they must talk about it. People take credit for being involved. I decided to get involved with this uprising, with this organization, with this cause. They will even identify others. Here's the father, the mother of our cause. Here's the kinds of people who helped start the cause even before I came along. And they take all the people who have been involved and themselves as being involved in an individual experience based upon and fed by individual perception. That's the way it has to be. But that ain't the way it is. And of course, to see how it is, to give you one of my weaker promises, or one of my stronger ones, to see what it is, answers all questions. Well, it answers all questions except the real problem of the one shoe in the highway, which other than that, I can assure you that being able to see what I'm talking about answers everything else. And perhaps some of you can go further. Maybe you'll be called by life, and the ultimate secrets will be revealed to you, and you can understand and someday tell me before I die to answer the question of one shoe laying in the highway. But no matter. My deal with that the gods did not intend man to comprehend. Everyone believes that they're interested in new knowledge, all the way from coming to see these tapes or reading a book to hoping that they will find some enlightened master or somebody. But most of you should be able to see by now that it is not so much a matter of expanded knowledge as it is a matter of man's expanded knowledge receptors. And if that was not real clear, I think one or two examples I can make it clearer, but would you note again that even if you get what I'm pointing at, ordinary consciousness cannot hold it. You cannot walk around in ordinary consciousness with the ordinary receptors you have. Let's just make it simply put, you can't remember this. And you should find it very curious. It is not a matter of expanded knowledge. It never has been. It's a matter of man's expanded knowledge receptors. For instance, I ask you, did suddenly one day Isaac Newton, did man suddenly discover gravity? They had recorded history for what, 4,000 or 5,000 years before that, and suddenly, after all these hundreds of thousands and millions of people on this planet, and gravity was here doing its dastardly deeds, or its welcome deeds, according to your viewpoint, I guess, that suddenly one day a man went, aha, and caught it, and discovered it. No. He didn't suddenly discover gravity. In a sense, he just discovered new brain areas that could perceive gravity at work. Could not only perceive it, but could perceive a description, a measurement, a mapping of it. But it was not, as you know, gravity didn't suddenly just start existing. I can't even recall now when Newton lived, 1600s, 1500s. Let us say, don't write me and tell me I'm wrong. I'm just going to say, April the 17th, 1592, Newton discovered gravity. Now you do know that there was gravity, the thing they call gravity, was around doing its duty before April the 17th, 1592. It was around more than a month before that. All right, well, why? Now, if we're using scientific examples, which I find hardy enough and sometimes disagreeable enough because it seems so far removed from great spiritual enterprises to some of you, that historically they attempt to describe some of the progression of knowledge, the progression of knowledge cum technology, but that in some way man continues to explore the unknown and discover these things. But they were always there. It was not that someone discovered gravity, to use that term, to stick with that. It was more a matter that they discovered areas of the brain heretofore unused that could see gravity and describe it. So it's not a progression of knowledge, it's a progression of the neural system. It's not so much, to bring it more up to date, that man, through knowledge, has developed theories of quantum mechanics. It's more that life has developed neural areas in him inside that can measure such things. Then voices in life's body could say, well, to carry it that far, it's only been in the last several decades that we have had the scientific equipment to be able to study and to make some sort of theoretical measurements of the world of particle physics, that they couldn't have done it in the 1500s or 1800s. We didn't have the knowledge. And it sounds right. But you still miss it. That the wide, wonderful world of particle physics, I assume you're following the same way as I use with gravity, it did not just suddenly start occurring in the 1960s to the point that they could see it. It is not equipment, it is not scientific technology that makes it possible to see it, to study it, to concoct theorems of it. It is not a progression of knowledge, it is a progression of knowledge receptors. It is a progression of the neural system within man. It's safe to assume anyone really listening to the last 2 or 3 minutes either finds what I said self-evident or you dismissed it completely. And it's neither one. Ordinary consciousness cannot hold on to this, even if you get a glimpse of it. And it is of some usefulness. That ordinary consciousness is constructed in such a way that everyone speaks about the need for more knowledge. And that's not it. That's the way it has to be in the ordinary world. But even people who believe they're on a mystical quest, or they're trying to expand themselves, trying to improve themselves, that what you need is more knowledge. Someone coming to see these tapes that they're showing of me talking, they come expecting, if they're expecting anything, I will find out something new knowledge. There is no such thing. And if there were, what good is it going to do you if you can't not perceive it? And if there is new knowledge, why can't you perceive it? But the belief for many, many years, of course, has been that there was secret knowledge and somebody was hiding it, some group of people were hiding it. Or that it is something that is so hard to develop that only a few people devote their life to it, or a few people torture themselves, or a few people are selected by the great gods. And they're told what the knowledge is, and if you can find them, they'll tell you. But it's not a matter of knowledge. If I told you something that you'd never heard, and said, all right, here is a rule of the universe, or here's the rule to wake up the unused portions of your nervous system, or here's the rules to get in touch with the great spirits and gods and forces and spirits that run the universe, it would have to be something with which your current perception apparatus could handle, or else you couldn't hear it. It wouldn't make any sense. And if it's something that your present system could perceive of, it's useless, because you've already heard it all before. You would have had to heard it all before, or if I told you something new, you've got to have heard it in some way before, or you couldn't hear it. I'd be speaking in the ultimate unknown tongue. But there's always the idea that there's some secret teaching, there's some secret knowledge that someone can buy, someone can discover, and if they get it, it will change everything. It is not a progression. It is not an expansion of knowledge. It's an expansion of man's nervous system. And he continues to expand that which he can see, which he can measure, which he can map. In a sense, the spectrum that limits the molecular activity that rearranges his neural system, that is, the apparent information and knowledge coming in, notice. Man and that which he has invented, not through expanded knowledge, but through the expansion of his own nervous system, he can now perceive of that through equipment without which the established limits of all the light waves, sound, that the instruments now will expand that in a way that he could not do without the instruments. But the instruments did not come about through an expansion of knowledge. It was already there. Things did not change just because Newton discovered gravity, did it? It was the expansion of their own nervous system, their own areas of the brain itself that could perceive things in a wider range. When you get into the areas that apparently are spiritual, people are even, sad to say, almost as dogmatic as scientists. Everyone waits for some new idea, everyone waits for a new teaching, everyone waits for new information. And gravity is right out there. The world of particle physics is right in here and right out there, and nobody can see it. I laughingly tell you that I see things in 4 dimensions, and I see everything tied together, and I see everything alive. But are you sure I'm joking? And I told you it's not spirits. It's not auras produced by whether you had horseradish or a vegetarian dinner. But it's not through knowledge. It's not through an expansion of knowledge. It's through being able to expand the way in which your perceptors pick up what's going on. Because everything that you now classify as secret knowledge or the needed information, I hate to continue to be pedestrian, but it's all right there. Everything. The answer to every question. It's not up in the heavens, and it's not in a cave in Tibet, and it's not in my back pocket. It's right there. But as long as you live at line level consciousness, as long as you take your own nervous system as being individual, my original drawing of man, the nervous system, and line level consciousness, that's the present time zone, wherever you are. As long as you live there, you will forever believe that what I need is more knowledge crammed in here. Whether you point to here or whether you think you're religious and you point to your little heart and soul. You think I need more knowledge in here and things would change. And why don't I quit fooling around and give you the secret? The secret is to get free from this. Then everything you think you want to know, it's right there. It is Newton discovering gravity. Is my God, let's assume he was fairly well read, from what I remember. Man finished elementary school at least. He probably knew that, hey, written history has humans hanging around this orb for the last 5,000 years, and I bet this son of a gun, this whole operation has been going on, and nobody's ever seen it. But according to the reports I read, the man did not take LSD. I don't think he claimed it was a mystical experience. At least Ernest Ainsley didn't lay his hands on him, which I understand can be quite an experience. He simply saw it. Nobody could teach him to see it. He simply saw it. Now, if you go past the world of general physics and particle physics, how about into the world, apparently, of religion, a spiritual phenomenon? These past heroes that people speak of, that apparently established religions or are accepted as some sort of mystical hero, what was it they did? In terminology, of course, it's always come out referring to some kind of force outside the system, i.e. the gods. Well, what was it that Abraham's and Confucius's is, and Moses's is, and Jesus's is, and Muhammad's is, and Buddha's is? What is it that they came up with? If you could get past those stories, if you got past line level consciousness, if you could get past your own, this block in the nervous system where you could read in your own nervous system the history of humanity, the stories are delightful. For their time and place, they are almost as clever. I'll give them this. They're almost as clever as some of mine. Of being able to come back and say, hey, a shrub caught on fire and it talked to me. Or to say, hey, I'm the only legitimate son of the gods. Or in other times and places, it would seem to be a greater claim to fame that, hey, I'm the illegitimate son of one of the princes. Splendid stories for their time and place. But it was based upon life had some people, well, let's leave it the kind of examples that humanity thinks about. That one given time and place, that one of these people discovered something not far removed from Newton and the proverbial apple. Scientists have to come up with new descriptions when apparently they have discovered something new. That is, when their particular nervous system has developed in a certain area and they see something that no one else has seen. They didn't discover it, they didn't invent it, they didn't conjure it up. It was there and nobody could see it until then. They saw it. If it's going to be of any importance, of course, when one person sees it, the right time and place, then suddenly, just people all over go, oh wow, I see it too. Then the person that apparently discovered it, that had this expanded knowledge, it's generally their responsibility. Just accept it. It's the way things are schemed. They name it, they map it. Now how about these so-called religious heroes, these spiritual prophets, these sons of the gods? I hint to you, hint, hint, that it's not far removed from these so-called discoveries of scientific laws. They too, at their time and place, are expected to measure it, to name it, to map it out. It then comes out as some sort of mystical system. It comes out as a religion. It does differ from the general description I was using of so-called scientific discoveries in that a man says, I've discovered the law of gravity. I've discovered the existence of gravity. And other people, he says, all right, I drop an apple and it falls and that's gravity. Shortly thereafter, people began to notice certain movements in the heavenly bodies that were heretofore unexpected. And they began to conjure up a map wherein gravity was acting not only between the planet Earth and dropped objects, but heavenly bodies. And people believed that I can observe that too, what you've described. But when you get into areas that seem to be non-scientific, you get into areas that seem to be uniquely human. The insides of humans. What can anybody observe? Because I still ask you week after week, what are you going to say next? Or once you begin to get some ability to perceive above your own level of consciousness, you should be partially amazed on your own that you and everyone else, even those apparently living in the present time zone in your time and place, take descriptions of humanity. The general mapping of man's psychology in the Western world, from Freud on up to now, they take it as being a scientific fact. a little hazy in some places, but the general mapping of it is correct. And it serves its purpose at the ordinary level, but once you see above it, you see that, in a sense, it's not even close. Or in the real, more mathematical sense, they've got 2/3 of it. But having 2/3 of something, until you see it, you got no idea how distorted that can be. Because that does not necessarily mean that if we're discussing so-called reality, that it's necessarily divided up into 3 parts like that I'm saying. And the people, if I say that consciousness is arranged to see 2/3 of it, you say, well, that ain't bad. Yeah. That's not necessarily the way it's set up. The 2/3, the divisions can be in all kinds of configurations. But that which seems to be just as plain as the nose on a baker's face about, well, here is why people act like they do. Here's a specific instance of somebody who mistreats women, and I have studied. I knew his father. I knew his home life, and there's the cause of it. Go back, look no further than his father. That's what caused this. And in a sense, that's not even close. For present-day binary time, if that's where you're going to live, that's fine. That's accepted fact. That's the truth. I'll agree with it. That is a fact. And that's just this side of a real scientific fact. There's enough data. There's enough everyday common sense observation. I tell you, that's true. But if you're going to expand your own perception of knowledge, if you're going to do that which you originally wanted to do, I tell you, that's not even close. That's why I continue to bring up contemporary consciousness's idea of this binary question of things that are either based and caused by heredity or the environment. And I keep telling you, that's one of the reasons that given those 2 choices, there is no such thing as the environment. And so for me to say, to track down anything, to say that this person mistreats women now because of how his father treated him, is a fact if you're ordinary, if you're going to live there. But the reality of it, that's not even close. It's just hardly in the same, not ballpark, it's hardly in the same universe as the truth. We'll pick up a little more about some areas I mentioned last week in response to some of the questions I'd been holding back from people writing me, if you recall. For those of you who didn't see last week's tape, I responded to some questions. One had to do, I was talking about responding to such questions as, is there anything to astrology? And I just use that as one example. This and that teaching, this or that religion, this or that philosophical, metaphysical system. And of all the things, the way in which I attempted to point to you last week, after what I mentioned tonight, see if I can cut it to the bone for those of you that heard any of the last 10 or 15 minutes. For someone attempting to do something extraordinary in their lifetime, for someone attempting to get yourself into life's permanent or long-range memory as opposed to its short-term memory, any established system, any religion, anything that's already been thought of, is from another time zone. It is now conservative. It is now reactionary. It is now a counterbalance. I'm talking about on the most mundane mechanical level. Not anything actually alive in the sense that you're looking for it. Whatever it is now simply a counterbalance to another clock. It is now a counterbalance to an old or to a newer time zone. So, in such things, let's say, as astrology, and plug in, fill in, and sell astrology, anything that you thought has interested you in the past. The thing is, in any of those, And after I'm dead, after I'm through with this, if it survives at all, which enough people are interested in, so it's going to survive in some way, even if I, on my deathbed, told everybody that I had any connection to, listen, don't ever mention this again, just don't ever mention my name like it never happened, as far as anybody else is concerned, and go with it yourself. But don't you people get together and don't discuss it, throw my body to the fishes, no monument, no nothing, burn all the books and forget about it externally. But everything, what I was getting to, would be, including this, after I was gone, if there's some form of it, seemed to arise. But back to astrology, I'm just trying to show you it keeps going. Every time a new time zone comes, I fall into the same hopper as everybody else. For instance, astrology. The thing is, there is no intrinsic knowledge or secrets in astrology. Instead of astrology, fill in anything else. Christianity, Judaism, Sufism, the fourth way, the seventh way, yoga. There is no intrinsic knowledge or secrets in those things. At one time, there was the understanding of he who originated the map. That's it. And yet ordinary consciousness will tell you otherwise. People faithfully study astrology and other things. People will apparently be attracted to and take up with some metaphysical system or some exotic religion and compile a huge library of every book they can afford, every book they can find in this area, believing, and it feels correct to them, at ordinary level, that there is some intrinsic value to this. Astrology, Christianity has a message. It has a truth that is intrinsic in it. There are secrets in there that if I could break open the shell, if I could get closer to the heart of this matter, there's something in there that would be of great value. This astrology, Christianity has a message. It has a truth that is intrinsic in it. There are secrets in there that if I could break open the shell, if I could get closer to the heart of this matter, there's something in there that would be of great value to me. And there is nothing in there. Not for the few people. For everybody else, there's just what they need, just what they're looking for, just what they're wired up to hunger for, they're going to find there. But there is no intrinsic knowledge or secret in any system that is already one time zone behind. All there ever was to it, at any time, from every past hero you ever had to right now, the only value that was ever there was the understanding of the person who made up the damn map. That if we're going to take Christianity, which everybody still seems, or a lot of people seem to still like it. It's had a long run. That there are intrinsic secrets, great worthy, innate truths in the teachings. Let's take Christianity and stick Jesus, the man Jesus, at the head of it. There is nothing in that. The only thing that was ever in that was when he was alive, he made all that up. Those who think that there is something of value in this, and again, it's of no importance one way or the other, but assuming I die and this takes on some kind of little form of life, and people begin to read or watch these tapes, and it builds up a whole system, and people get together and put it in a more reasonable, coherent, perhaps linear progression. I tell you now that there'll be nothing to it. Not because they're dumb, not because I was so wise and now these dumb fools can't figure it out right. That's not it. Once the time zone is moved ahead, there is no intrinsic value, no innate secret in anything. It is yesterday's news. It is a counterweight. It is a redneck. It is a yokel. And people attempting in a new time zone to study anything, whether it died, whether the man who invented it and made it all up, whether he died 20 years ago or 2,000 years ago, these people are yokels. They are down on the farm. They are regressive as they're supposed to be. But anyone who believes that there is some intrinsic value or some secret to be distilled from astrology, Christianity, Judaism, Buddhism, Sufism, you're dead on your feet. Somebody, I mentioned it last week, but I want to make sure you understand, somebody somewhere, and I'm not going to give you his name now because it's too hard to pronounce and you've never heard of him, but somebody invented astrology. I've invented almost as good a thing. I just distilled it down to a form that you can wrap up as simple as astrology. But, you know, just hang around, let me die, and so a few people will jump up and they'll get all this down into a small Vedi Mecum. We'll have our little Bible. They'll take out all the extraneous parts. They'll take out all of my profanity, and all my little asides, and my little jokes about Sears and Roebuck and the Pope and everybody else. And they'll get it down to a neat little system, and then you look back and you'll see I wasn't simply bragging. It will be real good. It'll be much better than astrology. Well, I don't know. Astrology was a stroke of genius. It really was. It was an extension of God's. You got to understand. But up here it is. You can use it with God. You can say, well, I'm a Christian, but I still believe in astrology. That there the things are, you can see them, and they're there, and they got to have some effect, right? Yeah, they do. But somebody, this guy that I'm going to tell you, he sat down, and knowing how these things are, well, I won't tell you more to give you the blues. But he concocted this whole thing, and he used it in the same way that I'm using the things I've concocted. But the only value in it was in the understanding of the son of a gun that made up all that crap. When he went, forget it. Also from last week, when I was talking about how for people really involved with this, there's got to be a kind of hardwired genetic basis for you to be properly attracted to this to begin with. And once you begin to understand, if you have taken care of any of your own innate weaknesses that are possible to be dealt with, that the matter of health becomes irrelevant. And I was even pointing out that there is no ambrosia, there is no magic food, and after a certain point you're going to find out it's already true, but you will perceive it, that it almost doesn't matter about such things as food, and it's just health. The idea of healthful diets is in the same ballpark as astrology. Several people dropped me little notes before the meeting tonight to show that stirred some curiosity. So I just had, I'll give you a one-line continuum from last week. If you don't believe that I'm correct, that what you eat don't hardly matter at all, what better explanation? You've never heard one before, so here it is. The almost worldwide continuing failure of diets. Why? Almost by and large, it's just a rule. Medical science is now having to come to grips with this statistically. That the population of the world, or the population of any given country, every year loses 24 million pounds on diets, and 24 million pounds are gained. And anybody that you know that's ever tried to go on a diet, you know what happens. In case you thought that at times I exaggerate. If diets mattered, if diets worked, they would work. But I'm telling you what you eat. And there's much more to it than this. I just didn't dwell on it last week. I was trying to lay out some little hints, because it's not limited to that. But what you eat just hardly don't matter at all. And that can't be true. It can't be true. Everything in you, everything in life says no. Man can't be told the exact truth. He never can. Not because of some kind of cosmic clause in my contract that I had to agree, all right, I understand. I can't tell them the whole truth because it would, it'd knock people to their knees. Or it's not that. It's the perceptions are not operational to where I could tell you everything I see. For all you know, I've already told you, but I haven't. But for all you know, I've already told you. But take a wider range. Man could not be told, not by somebody who understands it. Man can't be told that there is no freedom whatsoever. Now, he's been told that before. You know, by out-of-work politicians or philosophers that couldn't get tenure. They've been popping up since, at least in the Western world, since Grecian times. There's a philosopher popping up here and there saying, hey, men are nothing but robots. I see it as clear as hell, end of case. But you see, they're merely footnotes. And footnotes in philosophy at that, which makes them footnotes to footnotes. People who say, listen, we're all just mechanical robots. You do not have to worry if you're going to try and start some sort of system or religion or philosophy on that basis. Do not worry about how you're going to afford the large premises to hold your following. No problem. You'll be able to meet in a matchbox or a phone booth. And then the kind of people that show up you wouldn't want to associate with, at least in a close environment. Man cannot be told that. Rather, if you notice what I play around with, the closest that can really be said to speak about is a kind of minimal slack. It's to measure, to map, to conjure up enough examples in my own astrology and religion, right to the point that you feel as though that I'm about to say it in a minute. Listen, I know it. I have been with the guides. I've known it, and I'm going to tell you the fact now. Everything is locked in. You're destined to do out what you're going to do. The molecular flow, the scheme of everything is such that even when you believe, hey, I'm going against myself, I'm doing something I don't want to. It's not true. You can't. That's simply you saying that. It's the you molecularly that's already been arranged that says that. You either expect that I'm finally going to say that, or else off in the confines of your own dark mental closets at times. Maybe you're pondering over something I've said, collection of things, and it seems to come upon you just a dark cloud passing overhead in the noonday sun that, God damn, nothing's possible. We're all locked in. And then it's just a passing shower, though. You're over it. Man can't be told that. He can be told, as I said, but he can't hear it, assuming there's any validity. And so I keep taking it up from all kinds of directions to the point that there's nowhere else to go. I'm finally going to proclaim that, or you're finally going to see it for yourself, and you just don't want to think, what's after that? I don't want to think about it. And sure enough, you don't have to because it's gone. And so you keep taking it right up to that point, and then you talk about this minimal slack. I did not discover that. I did not invent it. Look at all the religions. Look at those that seem to be centered around some revealed prophet are those that say, I'm the Son of God, or God sent me. Go back and look. If you get free from your own genetic background now, and your own molecular reaction to any religion, and the whole religion is continually talking right up to this corner, painting itself up to the point that man cannot do anything. Of course, there's a little progress you notice from the yellow circuit's really infancy in the Western world, at least. In Grecian mythology was almost that, hey, we're done for. The gods do anything with us they want to. The only chance you got for any relief whatsoever is if, you know, the gods just happen to ignore you, if they're drunk or they're having a party or they're fighting among themselves, and you might get a day off. But you're not going to get much done. Don't try to leave town. Don't try to change professions. Don't try to change your mind, because you know what they're going to do. We got all these stories. So the progress has gone, you might say, from that into the prophets. Those men whose knowledge perception, or perceptors, were enlarged beyond the present time zone in their time and place. And they saw gravity and particle physics wherein nobody else could see it. So they started inventing astrology, this, Christianity, Judaism. But if you could look at the religions and all these systems in a certain way, they are painting man into this corner that we are completely helpless, if not helpless. We're painted into this corner. There's just nothing to be done except. And there's always this minimal slack. Is throw yourself on the God's mercies. Swear allegiance to the gods, and once this is over, I mean, this thing that we're in, we all know we can barely tolerate it. We can barely breathe. We'll be lucky to get through this alive, which I'm never sure what that meant. But we'll be lucky to get through this alive. But then, if you swear allegiance, if you put up with this crap and not curse the gods, when this is over, phew, hey, then we're talking about a different ball game. There is the slack. Another piece from last week, I want to make another comment. When I was pointing out stereotyping and why life has always had humanity bad-mouthing stereotyping, but on what apparently would be humane, religious, moralistic grounds. We should not stereotype people, because everyone who is Catholic or everyone who's green or everyone who's Irish do not necessarily act in unison. Or just because a gypsy insulted your mother and stuck their tongue out at you when you were 6 years old, it does not mean that all gypsies are ill-mannered. Here's another example, a prime example of life talking to itself, life struggling to rise above its own present time zone, its own present level of consciousness through humanity. And what I was talking around last week, I was just going to restate where I was really trying to point, is stereotyping is a very scientific reality to the body of life. In that mechanical behavior, a total field of mechanical action, is the basis of life's day-to-day existence. That same kind of mechanical behavior in life's higher circuits is inadequate for any kind of quantum growth. And so what apparently is happening on an individual level, that there seems to be built in to many people, a positive reaction to sentiments that say you should not stereotype. You should not badmouth whole groups of people, races, religions, the opposite sex, some economic class. A large part of humanity respond to that in a positive manner, saying, yeah, that's true. But the maps from which the words are derived always seem to be on a religious or a moralistic basis. But if you can begin to see these kinds of divisions I've been talking about, and the first one I drew, of life itself, this larger molecular scheme, and then it coming about through the individuals and people taking it individualistically, that life is announcing to itself, through man, that which is not profitable for it to grow in its own nervous system. Because although the day-by-day affairs run quite well, you might say on the basis of mechanics, all the way from volcanoes erupting to seas receding, the shifting of the plates of the earth, the movements of the heavens, and then into that which seems to be more individual areas that humanity still cannot deal with, as we were just mentioning, that same kind of mechanical behavior in people you should begin to see as quite sufficient for the day-to-day operations of life. Just struggling along day by day, life gets along quite well with that, in the same way that you can get along quite well with that, including your bitching about it. But it is cutting off potential nourishment when you let that stereotyping, when you get mechanics operating at what should be the higher levels, the potential higher levels in your consciousness and in life's consciousness, in its own nervous system, it will not feed the higher circuits. Life itself, of course, understands, since it told me to tell you about it, that life itself cannot abide thinking the same thing twice in the higher systems. And stereotyping is thinking the same thing twice at the very least. And then it amounts to giving it no thought whatsoever. The day-by-day operations of life is quite sufficient. The day-by-day operations of an individual is quite sufficient. As out of hand, you can dismiss, you can explain, you can bypass large groups of people on a continuing basis. Anybody you don't like. There's nothing moralistically wrong with it. It's necessary in life at the ordinary level. But you're cutting down on any nourishment. You're cutting down on whole areas of potential ways in which to expand your perception of knowledge. Your perception of what's going on, you're trying to feed the higher circuits very crude food that is sufficient to run the liver and the spleen, but you can't run this or that. Being in charge, I think I'll stop. But in case anyone listening here becomes part of this riffraff that try to turn what I have done into some sort of religion or system, or even if I should join in the riffraff and apparently do it before I die, as is my periodic wont, I come up with just a passing new either game plan of what this kind of religion or system would be if I were to do it, or, you know, what kind of place it would be, or who I would appoint head pope and what we'd call the head person, what kind of funny clothes I could wear. At any rate, it came to me perhaps what should be the slogan. Seems to me enough churches don't have slogans, enough religions. But since I intend to stay up to date right up until the end, I attempt to stay contemporary, notwithstanding the wide lapels I just noticed on this suit. I think that religions are going to have to come more into the mainstream of advertising and selling. That any good religion needs a good hard-hitting slogan. They got symbols. You can say that all religions have logos, Star of Davids and crosses. But at any rate, I've had several before. A few people hadn't heard them before. But I had a new one. In fact, I may deliver a whole evening's commentary. What decade is it? All right, in the 90s. But another possible slogan, and it's this. And you should take it to heart. I have lived by it for many years, and I have found great comfort in it. When all is said and done, shut up and stop.